Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I want to start by saying that I'm very nervous for two reasons. First, I saw today that my presentation had a little German flag by its side, and I thought that I would have to do this in German. And that's, I haven't spoken German professionally in 10 years, and I think that would really suck. So for those of you that were expecting me to speak in German, tut mir leid. But you can always catch me later after a couple beers, and I think the German will flow again. The second reason why I'm nervous is I'm from Brazil, and Brazil is playing the World Cup tonight. If we qualify in second, we might play Germany very soon. And the last time we played Germany, it was... Let's talk about my presentation. Maybe that's a better thing. My presentation will be around how do you move from just measuring emissions to actually making an impact on it. As we talked about before, Scope 3 tends to be where most of your emissions might be sitting. So the question is, how do you actually make an impact there? And let's take into account a certain scenario, right? We have two companies. One of them is calculating their emissions using spend-based data. They have very little visibility over the energy sources that their suppliers are using. They likely have lower levels of renewable energy in their supply chain, and they might be pretty exposed to volatility on these prices. Then we have company B. They're not only measuring their Scope 3 emissions, but they're actually engaging, doing something about it. So they're talking to their suppliers, they understand the energy mix that their suppliers are using, they know which facility run in each source, they understand if their suppliers have PPAs or what is their plan to get to more renewable electricity in the future. So these two companies might be operating in the same field, but we need to agree that they have vastly different positions. So right now, something like the conflict in Iran escalates, then natural gas prices go up 50%, and these two companies will have very different conversation places to start, basically. And of course, as you all probably know, even though every year it feels like we have something that is once in a lifetime, these things are not once in a lifetime. We had the post-COVID supply crunch, we had the Russian-Ukraine war, we had the Red Sea shipping crisis. So this is happening pretty often, and companies need to be prepared for this new scenario. And what we see is a big mismatch here, because on one hand, we see more and more companies committing to decarbonizing. You probably see a piece of news from the SBTi every now and then about the number of companies that have set science-based targets. I think last time I checked, there are more than 10,000 companies with such targets in the world today. But when you look at the companies that are actually moving, there's a mismatch here. So about only 15% of the G2000 companies are actually on track for having their own operations in net zero by 2050. And if you include Scope 3, that we know it's also most significant for these companies, this number goes even lower. Only 13% of these companies are actually on track. So pretty big mismatch here. And how do we close this mismatch? We will need supply chain data. Because eventually what we need to do is we need to detach business growth and emission growth, but we also need to be able to capture this detachment with the data that you're using. And if you keep on using spend-based data, your suppliers might be doing amazing, switching to renewable electricity, using better feedstock, really pulling a rabbit out of their hat. But if you continue to use spend-based data, you're not benefiting from this, which would be a pity. And that's one of the things that we need to put in place to make sure that we're moving from only accounting for Scope 3 emissions, but actually moving Scope 3 emissions. So there are a couple of things that I want to keep in mind here. One that when you talk to people that are Scope 3 practitioners, so people working on Scope 3 decarbonization, what are the most common challenges that we hear from them? And there's a pretty recent piece of research from the Scope 3 peer group that more than 60% of our colleagues in Scope 3, they're saying that supplier engagement is today a big pain point for them. And very specifically, supply chain engagement for low maturity or small and medium enterprises. So the question is, how do we collaborate? How do we help low maturity suppliers measure and decarbonize? And when you ask the same question to the supplier side of things, what we see is basically 4 things that suppliers are asking. Number 1, they're talking about aligned asks. What does it mean? It means that they're pretty tired of getting each one of their customers with their own survey that asks their own specific questions about whatever matters for them. You know, as an SME, that's just something that you can't keep up with. The second thing, which it's incredibly important to make sure that these programs actually work, is that they want to see proof that procurement is engaged. So you, as my client, come to me, you're asking me about my corporate carbon footprint, my renewable electricity usage, maybe my product carbon footprint. So the question that suppliers are asking is, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to bring me more volume if I'm doing well? Are you going to give me better payment terms? What's the outcome of this? I'm putting work into this. Why? So that's the second point that they're raising. The third point is having low or no cost tools available to them that allows them to act. Again, a lot of these companies, they don't have a team of LCA experts that are sitting there and they're just churning PCFs day and night, or very dedicated teams focusing on energy transition. They might be working on a pretty small team, and they want to make sure that they are providing you what you're asking, but that they need the tools to do so. And the last point is they want to see business cases. They want to show to me that a company in my sector, my size, can do what you're asking me to do. And show me, of course, what's the outcome of this. Did they make more business with you? Did they lower their own costs? Did they maybe gain business also somewhere else with other customers? So show me that it's worth spending time on this. That's the fourth point that they're raising. And really, when you're thinking about setting such a program for your suppliers, there are 2 key problems that we've learned to think about. One is a supplier maturity problem. So when you think about the maturity of your suppliers, and here, of course, I'm talking about maturity in terms of carbon emissions, they will be spread across a huge field. From best-in-class suppliers that have thousands of PCFs available to you, they measure scope 1, 2, 3, maybe they're committed to 100% renewable. They're really leading the pack here. But also you're going to have, on the other end of the spectrum, low maturity suppliers that have no idea what a PCF means, that don't even know what scope 1 to 3 is. Luckily, they've heard about the GHG protocol, but who knows? So if you try to deal with all of the suppliers using the same approach, it very likely will not work. So you need to be able to adjust the way that you approach suppliers, understanding their maturity level. So you offer something that is relevant for their maturity level, and that your ask is also aligned to what they're able to provide to you. So if you have a supplier that never calculated their scope 3 emissions before, and you're asking them about their decarbonization plan, or when do they hope to hit their SBTi targets, you're talking a different language. And on the other hand, if you're talking to a supplier that already publishes data on thousands of PCFs, maybe reports to the CDP, have SBTi targets, and you're sending them one more survey asking about what their scope 1, 2, 3 emissions is, they will likely not reply to your survey. And it's actually a bit offensive, I think. And then the second point that is very important is supplier fatigue. Again, we hear from a lot of suppliers, and maybe it's also the case on your own company, that you have your own clients asking you to fill out one more survey. And that generates an incredible amount of supplier fatigue. And that is really about, even in the same sector, people asking for different things. So we have this use case here from one of our customers that is a supplier in the pharmaceutical industry, saying exactly this, that they're getting different requests from AstraZeneca, Mars, the NHS, all with slightly different asks. And as a small company in a competitive environment, you just don't have the bandwidth to answer to all of them. So that's a second problem that we need to address when you're setting up such a program. We need to make sure that the asks start to become more consistent. So why do programs stall? Often companies want to do something about supplier engagement, but let's look at the dead bodies. Why do they fail? What's stopping them to actually making progress here? And we see 5 things that makes this program stall. One is the point around no segmentation. So I kind of nodded towards this on my last slide, where I'm showing the different maturity of suppliers. So if you're using the same approach to all 10,000 of your suppliers, you're likely failing most of them, because you're asking questions or you're asking data that is just not relevant for them, or they're not able to provide to you. So you need to be able to segment your suppliers to match their maturity level. The second point is using estimates as really insights, as concrete final points. And maybe some of you already had this kind of discussion before, where you present your scope 3 to your management team, you come back the next year, and the numbers look completely different. And they ask you, how the hell is that possible? What changed? And there's a huge education piece that we need to do here with management teams, explain to them that even though it says accounting on the name, GHG accounting is very different from financial accounting. And we need to give them the maturity to understand what is the implication of this, and not to treat spend-based data as financial data. It's very, very different, and we need to treat them as such. The next point is, again, the point around no business case. So if suppliers don't see the impact of the work that they're doing on sustainability in their top line, they will likely stop engaging with you. They need to think about how they're spending their time and their money, and if the work that they're putting in based on your request is not helping them drive more business and grow, they will stop doing it. Then there's a point again around survey fatigue and maturity. And the way that suppliers look at this is that if you're just sending them one more survey, it's one more ask. It's one more thing that you are asking them to do for you. But if you're able to provide them tools that actually allow them to take these steps that they didn't take before, then the scenario really flips. Instead of coming with one more ask, you are coming to offer them something, to allow them to really improve their business. And that's a complete different approach on how they handle your request. So how do you work together on this and not push this to your supplier as their problem and their responsibility? Because often it's your scope 3 targets. So you also have a responsibility on this. And last but not least, we have unclear ownership. And this, I think it's, for me, a big sign that shows the maturity of a company when they're looking at scope 3. If scope 3 is a topic that's sitting only on sustainability and procurement barely knows about this, for me, it's a clear indicator that they're just starting. They have a long, long road ahead of them. But if they're working together with procurement to handle this scope 3 challenge, that means that they're already much more advanced on this pathway. And I have a kind of a funny example, I guess, to share around unclear ownership, which we heard from a client, where sustainability was sending this kind of survey or request to their suppliers, asking them about scope 1 to 3 emissions, renewable electricity, and so on. But the procurement team had no idea that the surveys were even going out. So a supplier came to the procurement team and was like, hey, I just got this email from your company. Like, what do you want me to do here? And the procurement people just say, I don't know, maybe just ignore it. Maybe it's not for you, right? And that's the kind of outcome that you have when there's such a big mismatch. And the procurement people who are actually owning the relationship with suppliers have no idea what their own suppliers are being asked. So this is a gap and that we need to close, and we need to close it early to avoid that your suppliers think you're spamming them. And we've talked so far a lot about data and the data gap, right? The need to get primary data, the need to get high quality data. But this actually is closing pretty fast. So a lot of the companies that have been working on scope 3 for a while, they now see the benefit of this. They see an increase on the quality of the data that they're getting. But they're also getting closer to their own scope 3 target deadline. So just getting the data is not enough anymore. they see the need to also have action that impacts the number that they're getting. And what we see here very often is that the first time that you're improving your data quality, you're very likely seeing improvements on your scope 3. These emissions are going down because you have more accurate data. But you very quickly hit a plateau because, okay, now you have better data. You can already see the benefits of what your supplier have been doing. But if your supplier is not doing more initiatives and continue to decarbonize, you get stuck in this plateau and you likely not hit your scope 3 targets. So again, the data gap is closing, but now it needs to move from measurement to action. And there are actually 4 decarbonization pathways that we see the companies that are doing this successfully really pulling. And these 4 levers are: 1, renewable energy. And here actually specifically renewable electricity. So helping suppliers move to 100% renewable electricity is one of the most widely available, robust, and affordable thing that your supplier can do that has immediate impact. So that's number 1. And that's, if you want a quick win, that's the place where you gotta look first. The second part, we're still sticking to energy, is typically around natural gas. There, we often are talking about, electrifying production or maybe getting access to renewable natural gas. So there are some alternatives here. We're often talking about already a little bit of a higher premium per ton of CO2 reduced. But that's again, we're still on an energy space. And independent on what category of supplier we're looking at, they are using energy. They are using electricity. They might be using natural gas. So those 2 levers can be applied across the board, and that's why they're so powerful. Number 3 is around AI-powered action. So again, your supplier has done the work, they have calculated their emissions. Their question and your question will often be, now what? What are you doing to reduce your emissions? What are the initiatives that you're taking? And there's a lot of work that we can now do with AI to help take 1,000 initiatives, for example, and already pre-rank them for your suppliers based on the type of operations that they have, based on what we know their emissions look like, based where we know they are geographically. So this can become then a much more, a much faster process on going from I have no idea what to do to here are the top 20 initiatives I can do. Here are case studies of other companies that did this successfully. And here are basic financial information you need to know about this initiative to actually make an impact. So that's also, when we talk about collaborating with suppliers and help them move fast, it's an incredibly important lever. And then last but not least, we have this idea of this product value chain mapping. So thinking about, again, making this exchange of data more reliable and more standardized. That's something that you will need to eventually lean in if you want the sort of scalability that Scope 3 decarbonization at the science-based level requires. And I also brought this little slide here because I mentioned about how incredibly powerful and affordable renewable electricity for suppliers is. So we did a bit of an analysis combining different databases, and you have the source below on my deck, so you can always look it up. But we're looking at different sectors and looking at if these sectors were to decarbonize only their tier 1 suppliers. So only the suppliers that are providing them directly with products or services. What size of decarbonization would they be looking into? And as you can see, we're very often sitting here between 9 and 20%. And again, the cost of most of this sits below 10 euros per ton. If you are keeping track of the reduction costs for the different things that you can do, 10 euros per ton on something that you do not need to change your operations, it's an absolute no-brainer. And I think most of our clients have already exhausted this option to the maximum that they could. So now I talked about the things that we see not going well, but I want to share with you, 5 things that actually show the programs that deliver, so you can take something from this little presentation here. The first one is enablement beats exclusion. Again, if you're only asking your supplier for, hey, you gotta fill out this survey, otherwise I'm gonna buy less from you, otherwise you become a non-compliant supplier. If you're only using the stick as an approach, that's a pretty a bad way to start. So we're really incentivizing our clients to use a carrot here instead of a stick. So show them how they can do what you're asking them to do. Show them the benefit of doing this. Number 2 is on collaboration multiplying impact. So you want to really serve as a guide to your supplier, because eventually you'd like your supplier to do the same work with their supplier. And that's how actually we're going to drive Scope 3 decarbonization at scale. And that's why Scope 3 is such a thing in the first place, right? Like by design, the GHG protocol wanted to make sure that this responsibility is very closely chained, basically. Third, as you probably already got from my previous points, procurement must co-own the outcome. So sustainability needs to be embedded and working very deeply together with procurement to make sure that this goes somewhere. And of course, you don't need to start everywhere at the same time. Now, you might start at specific categories, at specific regions. So you can start relatively small, have your own internal business case, success story, and then you can spread from there. But it's vital that you co-own the outcome of this kind of program. Then the fourth point being decarbonization creates value. You need to find this. So you might often be the first company that is asking your supplier to decarbonize, to share data, to buy renewable electricity. But I can pretty much guarantee you that you will not be the last company asking your suppliers for this. And once they realize this, once they see the benefit that they did of the work that they did for you, paying off with someone else, then it really gets going. They'll go on their own. And then last but not least, imperfect action beats perfect data. I spent the first couple of years of my career doing life cycle assessment. So I was spending so much time thinking about how can I improve this input here, how can I get primary data here, and having chemists tells me that my model was terrible and didn't really show what was actually happening behind the process. But we don't have time to go behind the comma too much anymore. We need to combine improving data quality with action now. And then what I wanted to show as something that you can take away from this whole talk is often we want to think about this in an iterative approach, right? You want to do all the stuff that we discussed now all at once. But I think it's important that you see for yourself a bit of a timeline of what this might look like. And this is what you're often supporting our customers to build this for themselves. So in the beginning, it's a lot about mapping and segmenting. So understanding who are my most important suppliers, not only from a spend perspective, but from an emission perspective. What kind of maturity level do these suppliers have? Do they report to CDP? Do they have SBTi targets? Do they buy renewable electricity? And then this will enable you to start engaging them the right way, so segmenting them correctly. From there, you can think about what we call these no-regret levers. And I talked about renewable electricity as one of those. It's no changes on their operations. It shows an immediate impact on their carbon emissions. It's very hard for them to argue against this. So you need to be able to show them what are these no-regret levers as early as possible. And then last but not least, it becomes a bit of a cycle, right? Of continue to embed this further and further into your own organization. So adding more categories that you'll be doing this work with. Supporting your suppliers on doing this work on their own suppliers. So now thinking about tier 2. So it becomes a more robust program. But of course, this doesn't happen from the morning to the night. Now, it will take time, but if you have a clear picture, and as an organization you agree on the direction that you need to travel, this will help you tremendously. The alternative to this is just that it always feels like something that you can do next year, when the data is better, when there's less disruptions on the supply chain, when the pressure is higher, and when this moment arrives, it just might be a little too late. So as a ending slide here, the bottom line that I want to bring is that the organizations that start acting now in 2026 will be the ones that are harder to catch 2-3 years down the line. So 3 things that I would love for you to take from this. One is if you can know your challenges. What's stopping you to really making progress on your scope 3? And I know there might be many, but you need to be able to list some of them and choose 1 or 2 that you want to tackle. And this will help unblock a lot of your path to scope 3 decarbonization. Then there's something that I call the 90-day arc. So often when you come to a conference like this, you hear a lot of ideas, you come out of this hopefully energized of what you can do. And I really incentivize you to give yourself 90 days on how are you going to implement the things that you've learned. Hopefully some of what I just showed, but also there's a lot more things that we're learning here. And if you give yourself a bit of a timeline to implement this, I think it's going to make this much more impactful for you. And the last thing is this idea of that this resilience starts now. So, we talk about sustainability in procurement as one thing, but it unlocks much more than only carbon emissions, right? That's what I actually started my talk here today about. So carbon emissions is almost like an indicator or a KPI of this, but it goes much, much broader than this. And this combination of sustainability and procurement, from my perspective, can really help drive a lot of value for companies beyond just CO2 emissions, but looking at resilience and just adding value more broadly. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that you're okay with not doing it in German, and I hope that Brazil wins today.
So now we have much more time for questions if you want to ask something. Are there any questions? Not yet. All right.
I think I was very clear then.
Yeah.
But if you have any questions that come later, we have our stand going to the main stage here. I can answer any questions. On purpose, I didn't show anything about the platform that we have, so any demos or stuff like this, because it will be very specific. But feel free to stop by. Happy to understand a little bit more on what your specific challenges are. Maybe even build this 90-day arc together and bring more examples of what we can do.
All right, so it's nice to have you here, Caio.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you.